Shalom, everyone! Welcome to Social Studies with Miss Rogers, World History Edition. Today we are moving on to Abrahamic religions, and our first one is Judaism. My husband asked me when I started making this video, Rebecca, how can you have grown up in a Jewish household and not know how to pronounce Judaism? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I know exactly how to say Judaism. He said, Rebecca, it's Judaism, not Judaism. So we called up my father, the native-born Israeli, and I said, which is it? And he said, well, most people in America say Judaism, but Judaism does sound more Israeli. But honestly, either works. It's like pecan or pecan. Both are correct. Well, that's when my mom chimed in, both are not correct. It's pecan. It is not pecan. And that started its own thing. So I checked with our friends at NC Hillel, and yes, both pronunciations are correct. So let's get started. Last class when we talked about Buddhism, we mentioned how there wasn't really any worship involved, so there are some who question whether or not it's more of a philosophy than a religion. The thing is, a similar argument can actually be made for Judaism, that it's more of a culture and an identity than it is a religion. But we're going to get more into those details in a bit. A few seconds ago, I called Judaism an Abrahamic religion. There are 3 Abrahamic religions. The 3 are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They are called Abrahamic religions because they stem from one guy, Abraham. Because Abraham is such an important figure in all 3 of these religions, we naturally are going to tell his story. Our story starts in ancient Mesopotamia, the same Mesopotamia that we talked about in our first few classes. A man named Abram was a shepherd in the thriving city of Ur, and his father Taran was an idol maker for the town. Remember, we previously talked about how Mesopotamia was polytheistic, which means that people there worshipped multiple deities, and Taran built the idols for those deities. It's said in Judaism that one day, God came to Abram in a vision and said, I am the one true God. Leave this place that worships false idols. Take your wife Sarai and go to the promised land, and I will bless you in your future generations. He said, follow my instructions, and I will make you the father of many nations. Abram destroyed the idols in Taran's shop and left. Abram took his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot and set out for this promised land. I always get questions from students like, Miss Rogers, I don't get it. Is the promised land called Israel or Canaan? To Jewish people, Canaan is more like an area, kind of how we say like the Middle East. It's a vast area of land in a given place, and Israel is encompassed in Canaan. During Abram and his family's adventure to the Promised Land, a famine hit. The group decided to take refuge in Egypt. The pharaoh at the time thought Sarai was very pretty, and Abram was worried that the pharaoh would kill him in order to marry Sarai if he knew that Abram was her husband, so he posed as Sarai's brother. The pharaoh tried to woo Sarai with many gifts, including a handmaiden named Hagar. Eventually, it was realized that Abram really was Sarai's husband, but thanks to God's protection, they were able to all leave unharmed, and even Hagar joined their party. Later on, Abram and Sarai were confused. God had promised to make Abram the father of many nations, but Sarai was barren, meaning she's unable to have children. Sarai then decided to sacrifice her husband in her marriage and offer her handmaiden named Hagar to start his legacy of descendants. This is the beginning of great tension between Sarai and Hagar. Hagar is going to give birth to a baby boy named Ishmael, and it's also said that Hagar no longer wished to be treated like a handmaiden anymore. Sarah was very jealous of this, and she felt replaced. It's said in Judaism that years later, the voice of the Lord came to Abram in a vision and repeated the promise of the Holy Land. Abram and God then made a covenant ceremony. It's said that God changed Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah. Abraham would continue to follow the teachings of God and obey his every command, and God would protect Abraham's people and make him the father of nations, giving him land and descendants as numerous as the stars. It's said that God commanded Abraham to circumcise himself and his family, and if he did, he would be rewarded with another son by Sarah. Sarah laughed when she heard this because homegirl was 99 years old and she'd been barren her whole life. But sure enough, 1 year after the covenant ceremony, Sarah gave birth to a baby boy who she called Isaac. Fun fact, Isaac means laughter, so she really named this kid after her laughing at the idea of having a child. Sarah became very protective of her son and did not think Isaac would behave around Ishmael. She ordered Abraham to send him and Hagar away. It's said that Abraham looked to God for guidance, who simply said, "Do as your wife asks. Trust me. I promised I would watch over your descendants and I will keep them safe." With that reassurance, Abraham did send Ishmael and Hagar away. And this is the beginning of two branches of Abrahamic religions breaking away from each other. The Jewish culture will follow the story of Isaac, while the Islamic culture will follow the story of Ishmael. We'll follow Ishmael ourselves more when we talk about Islam, but today we're focusing on the Jewish line. Now again, this story of Abraham serves as a basis for the three Abrahamic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. What is really interesting is that Judaism and Christianity then follow to another story regarding Abraham and Isaac, how God commanded Abraham to sacrifice Isaac to test his faith, and just as Abraham was about to stab his son, God stopped him and praised his unquestioning faith. Muslims do hear a similar story, however, the son of Abraham that he's commanded to sacrifice is Ishmael and not Isaac. As I said before, the story of Abraham is the origin of the Jewish religion, but Judaism has kind of morphed in different areas. In fact, Judaism in Israel and Judaism in places like America or England looks pretty different. The reason for this being that nations such as America were really built around the idea of Christianity. Therefore, Judaism here also kind of changed. For example, Hanukkah is usually seen as one of the major holidays for Judaism in America, but originally and in Israel, Hanukkah is more of a minor holiday. It's just amped up here because it takes place around the same time as Christmas. Another example is the way that American schools teach about the Jewish God, because it's done so incredibly incorrectly. Kind of like the idea of polytheism or monotheism in regards to Hinduism. If you look at any textbook here in the United States, and possibly other countries around the world, it states that Jews pray to a god named Yahweh. And let me tell you, I was always so confused in school when they said that, because I've never heard that name before in my life. I actually got in trouble in high school for trying to say that. This incorrect detail comes from the fact that in the Torah, or the Holy Jewish Book, God's name is written in the Hebrew letters Yud, He, Vav, He, which if you look at it from an English equivalent, it would spell out something kind of like this. And then they just kind of added vowels where they thought they belonged. The thing is though, Jewish people have so much respect for the idea of God that they would never, ever actually pronounce the real spelling or pronunciation of his name. In fact, in most books, they symbolize his name with a completely different spelling so that no one even accidentally says his real name. And instead, they refer to him as Hashem or Adonai. Even in English, when writing out the word God, Jewish people do not write the full word. They typically leave the O out and replace it with a dash or a slash. And the most interesting thing about this is that, yes, there are some very religious Jews out there, but many Jewish people in the world don't do this for religious reasons, but out of respect and tradition. A lot of Jewish people are not religious. In fact, most of Israel is atheist or agnostic. Just for your own knowledge, atheism is the strong belief that there is no higher power or deity. Agnosticism is more of the idea of, I'm not really sure what to believe because there's not enough evidence one way or the other, it can't be proven. When schools teach that Jews pray to a god named Yahweh, a name that Jews themselves don't even use, it typically leads to a misunderstanding that Judaism has a different God than the other Abrahamic religions, when, in fact, all three Abrahamic religions pray to the same God that came to Abraham. With this being said, Judaism to some people is not a religion, but an identity. It's a culture. You may not believe religiously, but you'll always partake in the traditions because that's what's done. In America, it's much more common for Jews to be religious because, again, this is a society that, like it or not, was built upon Christian ideals, and the culture that grew in this area began to reflect those same kinds of lifestyles. However, in Israel, it's not that way. The super-religious or Orthodox minority is in control of the government there, and they set practices such as, on Fridays, especially in places like Jerusalem, everything is shut down because it's Shabbat. When I visited Israel a few years ago, I was in Jerusalem on a Friday, or Shabbat, and the elevators were modified, all the restaurants were shut down, everything was closed. I was even yelled at by the desk manager for playing piano in the lobby because it's not keeping Shabbat. I was really confused and asked my friends, Tal, Omri, what is this? I thought you said most of Israel was not religious. And they just kept telling me it's how it is. It's just what we do. It's tradition. Instead of living and doing things for a god specifically, cultural Jews strive to live an ethical life, driven by something called the Ten Commandments. Now, is living an ethical lifestyle only based on the Ten Commandments? No, it's not. There's so many things that can go into this and so many different religious books, but we're focusing on the Ten Commandments and we're going to save the rest for world religions. Now, because such a large part of Judaism is about culture and tradition and stories, we are also going to tell the story of Moses. After all, he too is a big part of other Abrahamic religions. But I always get students so confused as to how the Jews get to Egypt in the first place. So we're going to do a quick synopsis on that since, again, most of Jewish culture is all about stories and traditions anyways. So here we go! Abraham's son Isaac married a woman named Rebekah, and they had 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. Esau was older, but Jacob stole his birthright. Oh no! And ran away afterwards, afraid that his brother would hate him forever. While Jacob was away, he met a woman named Rachel who was oh so fine and wanted to marry her, but her father said, no, work for me for 10 years and then you may marry my daughter. So Jacob worked for 10 years to marry this woman. Talk about a romantic. On the wedding day, the bride's face was covered, as tradition. But after the wedding, when Jacob lifted his bride's veil, it was not Rachel. What? It was her older sister, Leah. Their father said, well, Leah is older and she must get married first. I said if you work 10 years, you could marry my daughter. I didn't specify which one, lol. But if you really want Rachel, you can always work another 10 years. Thanks, man, thanks. So Jacob did that. And then he had 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. Don't try this at home. Jacob eventually met with his brother Esau, and they fixed their issues and became a happy family again. And then Jacob had 12 kids. Dang. Only 2 belonged to Rachel, who was the love of his life. And the rest belonged to Leah and both Leah and Rachel's handmaidens. Unfortunately, Rachel died, and Jacob forever favored the 2 children she actually gave birth to, Joseph and Benjamin. The other kids could definitely tell that Joseph and Benjamin were the favorite, and they ragged on Joseph a lot. Not Benjamin as much, because he was the baby brother, and no one likes to hurt babies. Yet. So the brothers decided they would pull a hilarious prank and sell their brother into slavery. Because, that's what we do with annoying siblings. Right? Am I alone in this? Maybe? Joseph ended up being sold in Egypt, and after a string of events, wound up being in a position to interpret the Pharaoh's dreams and predicted a famine. The Pharaoh was impressed and was like, wow, you seem like a handy man to keep around. Stay here for a while. Years later, a famine hit. Whoa, who knew? And the original brothers came to Egypt in search of food. They did not recognize Joseph, who was in a position of power. Joseph recognized them and said, oh, they like practical jokes. I'll show them a practical joke. He made it look like baby brother Benjamin was stealing gold and jewels, and he threatened to arrest them and made them think that maybe they could even be put to death. He watched his brothers cry a little bit and then was like, LOL, JK, it's me, your brother you sold into slavery. Jokes aren't fun, are they? Then the Pharaoh invited Joseph's family and people into the land of Egypt, and that is how the Jewish people got there. Now onto the story of Moses, but still a quick synopsis. Even though originally the Jewish people were welcomed into Egypt, over the years as pharaohs came and gone, newer pharaohs couldn't really remember why these people were here. And eventually the pharaohs enslaved the Jewish people. After many generations, the newest pharaoh of Egypt decided that he felt threatened by the huge number of Jewish people within his kingdom, and he wanted to start getting rid of them entirely. He ordered that every male baby Jewish boy be killed. In this way, he could still keep his workforce going, but slowly kill off the Jewish population altogether. One Jewish baby boy's mother was desperate to save her baby, and she hid him in a basket which she placed in the river before the soldiers came to her door. The basket flowed down the Nile River until it landed in the backyard of the Pharaoh's palace. The basket was found by the Pharaoh's daughter, who picked up the baby and named him Moses, which means drawn from the river, and Moses was then raised as an Egyptian prince. When Moses reached adulthood, he one day was walking outside the palace and witnessed an Egyptian guard beating a Jewish slave. He tried to save the slave and fight the guard off, but he accidentally killed the guard in the process. Moses was so devastated by what he accidentally done that he fled Egypt and ran into the desert. While he was there, he came across a bush that was on fire. He went up to the bush and saw that, yes, it was on fire, but the leaves and the branches weren't burning. He then heard God's voice call to him and explained to Moses who he really is and where he comes from. In the Torah, it's written that God says, "I'm relying on you to help free our people. Go to Pharaoh and say, 'Let my people go.'" Moses was then given a staff that is said to have encompassed the greatness of the Lord, and he set off to Pharaoh. Moses went to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go!" And Pharaoh was like, I'm good. Moses warned that if Pharaoh did not comply, that the God of the Jewish people would bring plagues. And Pharaoh said, it's fine, our God's got this. One by one, there came plagues of water turning to blood, frogs everywhere, lice, flies, sick cattle, boils, hail, locusts, darkness. Finally, for the last plague, Moses instructed the Jewish people to mark their doors so the plague knew to pass over their houses. It said that death itself walked the earth for the killing of the firstborn of every Egyptian household. This included Pharaoh's son. Pharaoh was so devastated when he found his child dead that he said, "Get out! I do not want to see you in my face anymore." And Moses instructed the Jewish people to hurry. Let's get back to the promised land because Pharaoh is fake and he'll probably change his mind. When the Jews made it to the sea, they saw Egyptian soldiers chasing after them because, shocker, Pharaoh changed his mind. Moses took the staff given to him by God and placed it in the water, and it said the entire sea parted so that the Jewish people could pass. When all of the Jewish people were safely across the sea, the water collapsed, killing all of the Egyptian soldiers that were chasing them. The Jewish people then walked in the desert for years, and over time, they started getting rowdy and lost their way. This is when Moses heard from God again, instructing him to climb to the top of Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments. These were a set of ethical laws that people must follow. The 10 Commandments would become an incredibly important set of ethical rules, not only for both religious and cultural Jews, but Christians as well. Religious Jews 100% absolutely want to respect and honor God, but more than anything else, Judaism focuses on the idea of good deeds and good things that one can do during their own life, and a lot of this comes from the 10 Commandments. In fact, though the idea of an afterlife, or the world to come as it's often referred to, is present in the Jewish religion, it's not the main focus. The number one goal that is preached in Judaism is, what good or what mitzvah can I do in the here and now just because I should? The afterlife in Judaism isn't mentioned that often at all. And when it is, it usually goes hand in hand with the idea of the Messiah. The idea of a Messiah originated in Judaism. Jews believe that the Messiah, or the Anointed One, will bring the spiritual and political redemption of the Jewish people. It is believed that a descendant of King David will come to power, and he'll rebuild the temple, create peace on earth, and even raise the dead. It's said that once the Messiah comes, all evil in the world will cease to exist, and that Israel will be the center of the world. The Jewish people will eventually make their way back to Israel, and they'll build a great kingdom. Some of their most noteworthy rulers will leave enormous marks on the culture, like King Solomon, whose temple was considered magnificent, and who also built the city of Jerusalem. There's also King David, who would later inspire the Star of David, a major symbol of Judaism. During this time, we're also going to see the Jewish people split into 12 different tribes named after Jacob's children. The longest lasting tribe was the tribe of Judah, ironically the oldest brother of the family, and it's from Judah's name that we actually get the term Judaism or Judaism. Though the Jewish people will see years of greatness, they're also going to face many years of suffering. For thousands of years, we'll see them become enslaved, win freedom, become enslaved again, get past the next kingdom, become enslaved again, get freedom. It's going to be a mess and it's going to be a cycle. Eventually, it will lead to something called the Jewish diaspora, which is the scattering of Jewish people all over the world because their homeland is conquered. And these conquerors say, practice our religion or get out, so they get out. But we're going to save a lot of the kings and all of the transfers of power for world religions. The Jewish people celebrate many holidays, such as Passover, where they honor the Jewish people escaping from Egypt, and it's always celebrated in April. There's also Rosh Hashanah in the fall, which is the Jewish New Year. You eat apples and honey to have a sweet new year, and you tell your friends and family Shana Tova. Yom Kippur always follows right behind Rosh Hashanah. A lot of students have wondered where the random Wednesday they get off of school in the fall comes from, and that's Yom Kippur. It's a day of fasting where Jews apologize for all of the wrongdoings they've done in the past year. There are so many holidays that we could be talking about, and so many other stories, but we're gonna save all of those for world religions. The thing that makes it so easy for me to ramble about Judaism is that I just personally know so many of the stories, and I love telling stories, so I appreciate you all bearing with me. However, now that we have a strong basis for our Abrahamic religions, we'll be able to move on to Christianity, which is next. So, I will see y'all then. Bye!